Good morning. We'd like to welcome you to another edition of the Sunday School Review. This week's Sunday School lesson is entitled Isaac Calls on the Name of the Lord. And we are still in Genesis. Today we are in the 26th chapter of Genesis. Our lesson is taken from verses 24 through 33. Now, the 26th chapter of Genesis, the focus is on Isaac. There's other characters in the chapter 26, but the primary focus of this 26th chapter of Genesis is on Isaac. Now, we was introduced to Isaac last week, and we said that Isaac was the promised seed of Abraham. That is the son of Abraham and Sarah. Isaac was the promised son. And we are still talking about sacrifices and altars that predates the Mosaic law. And our lesson is Isaac calls on the name of the Lord. In other words, Isaac builds an altar, and we're going to read that in our lesson. Isaac builds an altar and calls on the name of the Lord. Now, again, I said the 26th chapter of Genesis is primarily about Isaac. And we're going to know in the 26th chapter, we're going to cover several verses of the 26th chapter that's not in our lesson. Our lesson is taken from verses 24 through 33 of this 26th chapter. But we're going to cover some other verses in this chapter as well. And in those verses, we're going to see that Abraham, that is Isaac's father, had very similar experiences as did Isaac, that is the son. Okay, we're going to see appearing to Isaac in this chapter. We're going to see him appearing to Isaac twice in this chapter, that is two times. And we also going to talk about what did God reaffirm to Isaac. Okay, what did God reaffirm? Namely, God reaffirmed the covenant. The same promise he made to his father Abraham, he's going to make to Isaac in this chapter. And we're also going to see the results of the dispute that Isaac had with the king of Gershur. Just as Abraham had a dispute in his day over water, over wells, then that's what we're going to be talking about too. The wells, God provided in other water, a well. Okay, let's look at. We're going to start again and verse 1 of chapter 26, and this is a very well. It's going to tell. Verse 1 is going to tell us. And there was a famine in the land beside the first famine that was in the days of Abraham. That was his father. Similar experience. And Isaac went unto Abimelech, king of the Philistines, unto Gerar. That was the location, Gerar. Okay, so Abimelech was a king of the Philistines in Gerar. Okay, so that was a famine, just like it was in his father's day, Abraham's day. That was a famine. And verse 2 says, And the Lord appeared unto him. This is the first time in this chapter that the Lord has appeared to Isaac. The Lord appeared unto him and said, go not into Egypt. Now, his father Abraham, when there was a famine, he went to Egypt. So the first thing the Lord is telling Isaac, don't go into Egypt, in other words, like your father did. And you'll find that in chapters 12, that is of Genesis, and verse 1, where his father, and as Abraham went to Egypt to avoid the famine, to get relief from the famine. In other words, don't go to Egypt, okay? Do not go down to Egypt, dwell in a land which I shall tell thee of. In other words, we're going to see obedience. Don't go to Egypt, dwell where I tell you to. Okay, verse 3 says, sojourn in this land, or stay in this land, and I will be with thee, I will bless thee, for unto thee and thy seed I will give all these countries, and I will perform the oath, the promise which I swear unto Abraham thy father. Let's read verse 4. And I will make thy seed to multiply as the stars of the heaven. I will give unto thee, unto thy seed, in all the countries, and into thy seed shall all the nations of the earth be blessed. This is the same promise that the Lord made to Abraham, his father. So this is the promise or the covenant restated to Isaac. The same promise I made to Abraham, your father, I'm making the same promise to you. And this is the first time in this chapter that he's making this promise. Okay? In verse 5, because that Abraham obeyed my voice and kept my charges, my covenants, my statutes, and my law. In other words, follow my instructions and you will be blessed. And that's the first takeaway from this lesson. If you follow God's instructions, you will be blessed. And we're going to see that exact same thing happening in this week's lesson. Isaac followed God's instruction as his father Abraham did, and Abraham was blessed. And Isaac, he said to Isaac, if you follow my instructions like my father did, I will bless you likewise. I'm making the same promise to you. Okay, that's the first time you see that promise or the covenant restated in this chapter. Okay, now, and verse 7 is a similar experience. Now, that's the first experience, the famine that your father Abraham experienced. You're going to experience the same thing. Okay, stay where I tell you, and you'll be blessed. Okay, the second thing that is very similar to Abraham's life and Isaac's life, verse 7 tells us, and the man of the place asked him of his wife, and he said, she's my sister. Remember that? Remember what Abraham said? Abraham said Sarah was his sister. Why? It's the same thing here. Okay. For he feared to say, she is my wife, lest the men of the place shall kill me for Rebekah, because she was fair to look upon. So both Sarah, that was the same thing that Abraham said. Because Sarah was fair, beautiful, the men gonna take it, which they did, okay? And secondly, Isaac is saying the same thing, because both, if you look at it, both Sarah, Abraham's wife, was fair to look on, was beautiful. And verse 7 tells us that Rebekah, that is Isaac's wife, was beautiful. And Isaac did the same thing his father did. He lied and told the king that she was his sister, just like his father Abraham said Sarah was his sister. So they both lied about the same thing. Very same thing. Very same thing. Okay. But then the king Abimelech, that's in verse 9, he found out. And okay, let's read that. He said, and Abimelech said unto Isaac, he called Isaac and said, behold, I was sure that she is your wife. Okay. So Abimelech was the king. He found out. He found out. But now the whole thing is in verses, next few verses, especially verse 11, 12. Okay. The Lord blessed Isaac greatly. We're going to read a couple of verses there. Let's do it 11. And Abimelech charged all the people saying that, okay, well, that's okay. 12 and 13 is one I want. Then Isaac sowed in the land. This is the blessing part of Isaac. Isaac sowed in the land and received of the same year 100-fold, not 5-fold, 100-fold. And the Lord blessed him. That's verse 12. He was blessed greatly. Verse 13. And the man waxed great and went forward. The man waxed great and went forward and grew until he became very great. In other words, he was very wealthy. The Lord, because of Isaac's obedience to the Lord, okay, and in other words, in remaining in the land, that is, God blessed him because of his obedience. He was blessed and he was very wealthy, very great. Verse 14 said, for he had possession of flocks, possession of herd, and great store of servants, and the Philistines envied him. So because of God's blessing upon Isaac, because God is faithful, and Isaac's obedience to God, he was blessed greatly. And the people of that land envied him. That's what verse 14 said. And from 14 all the way down to 22, it was disputing about wells. And we know wells produce water. And they needed water. It tells you they had what is it? Crops. You need water for crops. You need water for herd and flock and all that. So water was important. So they needed water to survive, and they're to prosper. Let's put it that way. Okay, so there was a dispute. When you read 14 all the way down to 22, as I said, it's talking about disputes between water rights, water. The same dispute, and if you go to Genesis. Well, we're in Genesis, but if you go to the early part of Genesis, around 21st chapter, you'll see how Abraham, there was, well, let's read 15. 15 tells you. For all the wells which their father servants had dug in the days of Abraham, the Philistine had stopped them. Okay. So basically, the same dispute that Abraham had with, as it relates to wells and water, Isaac had the same dispute. So as I said, the experiences of Abraham and Isaac mirrored each other. They mirrored each other. And it's all talked about in chapter 26. Okay, we go down to verse 22. Our lesson starts at 24, but we go down to 22, 21 and 22, and said to dig another well, that's 21, and stole there for the altar. He called the name of the place Sithan, and removed this and dug another well. So basically, they dig a well, and as they dig a well, they come a problem there. There's a conflict. They dig another well. Okay, and 22 said, as said, it dug another well, for they stole not, and called the name of the place Rehoboth. And he said, for the Lord had made room for us, and he shall be fruitful in the land. In other words, they went from well to well, and each time they go dig a well, there was a dispute there. And the last well is in 22. They dug this well, and it was no dispute. In other words, they the people of the land did not uh, 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 lay claim to that well. Okay, and 23 it said, and he went up from this to Bathsheba. So basically, they went from well to well, and each time the well was dug, there was a dispute over water rights. And as I said, water was essential for crops, for herd, and so water was very necessary. And just as there were disputes between the water rights with his father Abraham, there was disputes with Isaac and the neighbors over water. Okay, and the last well that is talked about in verse 22, there was no dispute over that well, and he said, "For now the Lord has provided room for us, and we shall be fruitful in the land." In other words, there was a well that there was not in contest. Okay, and that's when where our lesson takes up in verse 24, and we have two outlines. The first outline is covenant promise, and that's verses 24 and 25, and the second outline is promise kept, and that's verses 26 through 33. Let's begin with our first set of scriptures here. Our first outline, okay, covenant promises. And the Lord appeared unto him the same night. Now, this again, as I said, the second time the Lord appeared to him, we read that in verse 2 of chapter 26. The Lord appeared unto Isaac and told him, "Don't go into Egypt." That's the first time. And he repeated the same promise that he made to his father Abraham there. We read it in verses 3 and 4. He repeated the same promise. He repeated the covenant. Okay, now he's appeared to him. It said, "And the Lord appeared unto him." This is the second time. And he said unto him, "I am the God of Abraham thy father. Fear not, for I am with thee. I will bless thee. I will multiply thy seed for thy servant Abraham's sake." Okay. Now, if we see this, this is the promise restated, the covenant reaffirmed with Isaac. Now he's reaffirming the same covenant that obviously he made with Isaac, with Abraham, his father Abraham, and he's also reciting the same covenant that he made with Isaac in verses 2 and 3 of this chapter. And again in verse 24, he's repeating the same promise or making the same covenant with him. So this is the second time in this chapter that the Lord is making this promise. And he's saying in verse 24, he said, I'm doing this on behalf of my servant Abraham. That is, on behalf of your father, for Abraham's sake, because of Abraham's faithfulness to me. That's why I made the promise, and I'm reaffirming this promise to you, That is the son of Abraham. That is the promised seed. And we talked about last week, Isaac was not the firstborn of Adam, but he was of Abraham. But he was the promised son. Okay, the promised son. Okay, and this is what we see. Just as Abraham's obedience led to blessing and protection, Isaac's obedience led to blessing and protection likewise. Okay, let's go to verse 25. And he built an altar there and called upon the name of the Lord and pitched in his tent there. And there Isaac's servants digged a well. Okay, just like his father. Okay, so what is talking about here? Because of obedience. Okay, just like his father Abraham offered sacrifice or worship God. So that's the purpose of the altar, is to worship God for his blessing and his faithfulness. So verse 25 said, he built an altar. That is Isaac. Built an altar there and called on the name of the Lord. So that's the essence behind building an altar, is to worship God for his blessing and for his faithfulness. And the Lord is reaffirming to Isaac, just like I was with your father Abraham, so will I be with you. I'm making the same promise. The same offer is on the table. The same offer is on the table. The same offer that I made with your father Abraham, that offer has been extended to you and your descendants. So it's so that the covenant is a multi-generational covenant. It just didn't cover Adam's generation. Once Adam died, the covenant died. No, it was a multi-generational covenant. As we know, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and actually Abraham and his descendants. Okay, so it was a multi-generational covenant that God established with Abraham. Okay, so that's the first outline, is that covenant promises. The same promise, the same covenant that I made with your father, Abraham, I'm making that with you. And so long as you are obedient to my word, so long as you're obedient, I will bless you. I will bless and protect you. Okay, let's go to the second outline, is promises kept, and that's verses 26 through 27. It says, 26 says, then Abimelech went to him from Gerar, and Ashtoreth, one of his friends, and Philico, the chief captain of his army. And 27, and Isaac said unto them, wherefore come see me, seeing you hate me, we have and have sent me away from you. Now, in other words, and this is a question here. He's asking, okay, why are you coming to me? Now, okay, let's put a little bit of meat on these bones here. Okay, now we read in the early part of this lesson here, verse 14. We read verse 14, and said, for he had possessions of flocks and possessions of herd, and a great store of servants, and the Philistines envied him. So basically, they was gonna look. You leave our country. They wanted to throw him out. They was gonna throw him out. Okay, because of, as I said, verses 15 all the way down to 22, of the disputes over the wells, over with their neighbors, over water. Okay, and we'll see that. So basically, when he said in 27, and Isaac said unto him, when they came unto him, I mean they were fighting. Basically, there was dispute. There was dispute. There was violence, threat of violence. And Isaac said, why are you coming to me? Why are you coming to me seeing that you hate me? Seeing that you hate me and have sent me away from you. Why are you coming to me? Why do you seek my alliance now? I mean, that's a legitimate question. I mean, to ask the people, wait a minute. Wasn't just a minute of you trying to, you didn't throw me out? You hate me. Why are you coming to me now? And verse 28 will tell us, really. He said, 28 said, and they said, this is what the people, what they said, the ones that came to, this is what they said. We saw certainly that the Lord was with you. Okay. With the, and he said, let there be now be an oath between us, even betwixt us and thee, and let us make a covenant with thee. In other words, let's now form an alliance. Why? Because we see how the Lord bless you. Okay, we just read it back in verse 11, but the 12, and Isaac sowed in the land, okay, and received it in the same year 100-fold, and the Lord blessed him, okay. And 13, the man waxed great and went forward and grew until he became very great. And 14, he had possession of flocks and possession of herd and a great store of servants, and the Philistine envied him. So basically, yeah, we see how the Lord has blessed you. That's why we coming to you to form an alliance, because the Lord has been blessing you. I mean, it's just like if you see someone investing in something, and I'm not promoting cryptocurrency or anything like that, but if somebody says, well, I invested $10,000 in cryptocurrency, in a couple of years they're a millionaire. What? Okay, we see how you were blessed, and not saying that, and people load onto it, and we know that it can go the other way too. The whole idea is that greed and all that. But the point is this: their answer was really, we see how the Lord has blessed you. That's why we want to join up with you, because we see how the Lord had blessed. That's what they said in 28. We saw certainly that the Lord was with thee, and we said, let us be in an oath. Okay, let us form an alliance. So basically, we might be blessed too, vicarious. I call it vicariously. We might be blessed too, because we see, and we just read. Well, actually, we didn't read it all, but I call your attention to it in verse 15 through 22 of 26. We saw how they would cap up the well, and Isaac would go dig another well. They would go and stop up that well, and Isaac would go dig another well. In other words, the Lord was blessing him. He was blessing him. So basically, in other words, well, they said, well, we're gonna stop up that well. Okay, we'll build another one. We'll dig another well. So basically, in other words, we can't stop this guy because the Lord is with him. So what's it saying? You can't beat him, join him. We can't stop him, so we might as well join him. Okay, so that's what that's the answer to Isaac. Why? In verse 27, there's a question. He says, wherefore you come to me, seeing you hate me and sent me away from you? That's a question mark. Why are you coming to me now? And they answered in 28, because we saw that the Lord was blessing. The Lord was with you. So we want to join up with you. Okay? That's why we want to make an oath. It says covenant, an oath with you, because the Lord is with you. That's why we want to do it. Okay? In verse 29. Thou will, this is the oath. This is the oath here. It said, thou will do us no harm, as we have not touched you, and we have done unto thee nothing but good. That's what they're saying. And set thee away in peace, but thou art now blessed of the Lord. So, I mean, they're saying, well, we didn't, we just sent you away. We sent you away in peace. But now let's be friends now. Let's be friends now, because we see that you blessed of the Lord. We want to be friends now. And the last few verses gives Isaac's response to this, as they said, let's let bygones be bygones. Okay. And this was Isaac's response in verse 30. The conflict has reached a resolution. Conflict has been resolved. And this is Isaac's response. And he made a feast, and he did eat and drink. In other words, that was the thing that sealed the deal. They said, okay, we have a deal. We have a deal. We have a deal. And verse 31 said, and they rose up bedtime in the morning and sware one to another, and Isaac sent them away, and they departed from him in peace. So this was the solution. This was the resolution. The conflict as it relates to arguing about water and everything. The conflict is resolved. And they 30 said they made a feast and ate and drank, and the deal was sealed. Okay, now let's go to our last two scriptures here, and this is going to show God's divine provisions here. So this lesson here is about obedience, the God's obedience, how he's obedient, and how that leads to his blessings and God's provision. God is going to provide. And let's do the last two verses. And it came to pass the same day that Isaac's servant came and told him concerning the well which they had dug, and said unto him, we found water. We found water. So as I said, water was very essential. Water was a very needed commodity. So we found water, verse 32, verse 33, and he called it Sheba. Therefore, the name of the city is Beersheba. Until this day, it's called Beersheba until this day. Okay. So we see in this lesson here that obedience to God, okay, leads to his blessings and his protection. Obedience to God. Isaac was obedient to God, and our obedience to God will likewise lead to blessing and protection. Is when you are where God wants you to be and in his will. We read in the first part of 26 how there was a famine, and unlike his father Abraham, there was a famine in that land too, and Abraham moved to Egypt when there was a famine. And so Abraham to Egypt during the famine, but Isaac to Gerar. And we read in verse 2, the Lord appealed unto him and said, go not down into Egypt. Like I said, like his father, Don't go into Egypt, dwell in the land which I shall tell you. And 3 says, sojourn in this land. No, stay here. So obedience to God and where he wants you to be. So Isaac stayed and was in the place where God wanted him to be. He didn't flee into an area where God didn't want him to be. He stayed there, and the Lord blessed him. And the last 2 verses of our lesson said, it came to pass the same day Isaac's servant came and told him concerning the well they had dug, and said unto him, we found water. God provided. Okay, God provided for Isaac. God provided Isaac with water. That's what was needed. Water. That's what was needed for Isaac to prosper. Okay, so if you're obedient, you will be provided his protection, his power, and his presence. So, and God is faithful. God is faithful. And this is his promise. Just like I was faithful to your father, Abraham, I will be faithful to me so long as you go where I tell you to go, you are obedient, okay? You are obedient. You will have my protection and my blessings. And the same promise is made to us. So long as we are obedient, okay, to God, we can be assured, just like the promises that God made throughout the ages. He has fulfilled those promises. He will fulfill those promises with us, so long as we are obedient to his word. And that's our lesson today. Abraham calls on the name of the Lord. In other words, he builds an altar that is to worship God. And that was because of Abraham's obedience to God. And Abraham and he promised Isaac, just like he promised his father, that he would bless and protect him. We'd like to thank you for watching today. We ask you to join us again next week for another edition of the Sunday School Review. Thank you.